Hello, hello.
Hey, Chris. Good morning.
Morning.
Happy early Thanksgiving.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we'll give it until 5 past until we get started.
Okay.
Hello, hello. I posted the deck in the chat. We'll get started about 5 past. Hey, Jonathan.
Hey.
Hey, Ben.
Hey, Chris.
Give it a few more minutes and we'll get started. Hey, Alexis.
Hey there. How are you doing?
Good. We'll give it a couple more minutes before we get started.
Hi, this is Solomon.
Hey, Solomon. Good to hear from you. We'll get started in about a minute.
All right.
Hey, Ken. Good to hear from you.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Good.
All right, it's about 5 past. Just to check on the phone, do we have Camille, Sam, or any of the Bryans on the line?
This is Antonio from Google.
All right, cool, thanks. Cool, Alexis, I'm gonna give it to you to get started.
Thank you very much, Chris. Hi, everybody. I'm just trying, actually, I don't even have the stupid deck open, sorry. I thought I did.
No worries.
Close that. Give me just a second here. Apologies, everybody.
I put it in the chat, so you should be able to get it pretty quick.
Thanks. Shit.
And it looks like Brian Grant just joined us, so perfect.
Right. Okay, so hey Brian. Today's meeting, I'm really keen to get a readout on storage and networking, and that's reflected in the agenda. In preparation for discussion in person at KubeCon, Cloud Native Con in Austin at the beginning of December. So our agenda today should focus on that. I'll cover a couple of things quickly first, and then if we have time, we'll have a presentation from Open Policy Agent at the end. So moving to slide 6, just a little reminder that we have a call out for assistance for a number of different pieces of project DD or preparation, helping people to build proposals and review them. The projects in question are shown here: Istio, Nats, Rook, Spiffy, and Vitesse. If I've left one out, I apologize. Please add it if you are a project owner, and you should be on here. If you are a TOC contributor and you would like to help with one of these or more, please either email the list or comment on the GitHub issue or get in touch with Chris. In the case of Nats, email myself. Okay, I believe, Chris, can you just tell us with slide 7 what's happened with the TOC operating principles vote?
Yeah, so we have enough votes to pass. I would love to actually get a unanimous vote on this from the TOC. So I'm going to hold open the vote a little bit longer and ask for Camille, Sam, and Brian to please vote on the principles before merging it in. So thanks for everyone who's voted for now, but for Camille, Sam, and Brian, would appreciate a vote over the next couple of days.
Yes, it would be good to get a point of view from everyone on this, because I think it's important for how this document is seen by the governing board as well, because we are asking them essentially to sign off on it too, because this is the first time we've had a chance to elaborate on the charter that was created at the start of the CNCF, since which time we've learned a bit about what we're actually trying to do. So please vote. Slide 8, project review and backlog. 2 things here. First of all, Chris and I, as mentioned last week, that we've updated the priorities and backlog spreadsheets, people who are interested in the planning for future projects or have ideas about what should be involved should be looking at these and sending Chris and me thoughts on this or publishing them on the TOC list. Also, Chris, I'd like you to talk about the project reviews that we're going to kick off, please.
Yeah, no worries. I'll be quick on this one. So, you know, we're at the point where projects are ready to graduate, especially given that we have defined the graduation criteria earlier this year. I've been reaching out to projects individually and asking them to kind of come up with a list of basically items stating that they've fulfilled the criteria. So as a guinea pig, I started with core DNS because that one's an easy one. That one's just going from inception to incubation. I linked the PR. I would like the TOC to kind of look at it and see if there's agreement in having core DNS to move from inception to incubation. If people are happy with that kind of workflow, I will start doing the same for Kubernetes, Fluentd, Prometheus, and other projects.
Any questions about this? Okay, just to remind people, it is important that we do a good job of talking to existing projects and making sure that they feel like the CNCF is there to help them and to guide them and answer questions as they grow. Not all projects are proceeding at the same rate. And we also have the as yet unused threat of removal from the CNCF if a project is somehow struggling, which I hope we'll never have to use, but is important as a exit point because we don't want the CNCF to be a place where there are any projects that are not succeeding. Okay, slide 9.
I like this.
Yes,
I have a question on that. Sorry, this is Solomon. I think there's a lot of interest. Well, I'll speak for myself, but I think it's the case for others in the TOC. There's a lot of interest in helping more in existing projects as opposed to reviewing new projects. But personally, I'm always wondering, is there an avenue for helping that I'm not aware of that I should be exploring? Is there a single place to go where all the different paths are listed to help?
Yes, indeed. We just created that. I know that you've been rather busy in the last few months. I missed a few calls. But Chris and Dan have created something called the service desk, which is intended to be a home for this stuff. Perhaps you could explain it, Chris.
Yeah, Solomon. If you go to github.com/CNCF service desk, it basically lists, it's kind of a central way for projects to ask help from the foundation. Generally, it was not intended for projects to ask for help from individual TOC members, but we could definitely provide that option if people are interested.
Yeah, that's perfect. And if there's anything proactive also that we should be incorporating in our weekly routine, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm hoping to automate at least some of the kind of metrics around projects so we could at least, from a TOC perspective, see if there's something unhealthy going on and maybe be proactive. But for now, it's basically most projects have a monthly meeting with me where I kind of follow up and ask how things are going and essentially now encourage them to use a service desk to ask for anything that they may need.
Yeah.
Awesome. I'll keep an eye on that.
But just to peel away one layer of that, I think it's important to say this. There are some projects where there are, let's say, issues. There is one project in particular where Chris and Dan and I have been spending some time since about February on and off trying to figure out ways for the maintainers to grow their maintainer base because they're kind of tight-knit and there's been a few strong personalities in there, which has led to some issues that I don't want to describe on the call in detail. And there is a space here for members of the TOC with experience to actually really help because it's time consuming. It's a highly sensitive issue sometimes. And Solomon, if you want to put some time into this, it would be absolutely welcome. So please do let me know, maybe offline, or maybe we can catch up about it in conferences to talk about it some more. But some of these projects definitely want to get external people to come along and help them out with unpicking issues, social issues largely.
Yeah, that sounds very interesting. Yeah, I'm happy to help. Thanks.
Okay. So please do drop me and Chris a note about that, and we'll follow up. Okay, so then we move on to the topic of the face-to-face, which is planned for 2 p.m. on the Thursday, December the 7th in Austin. This is an open session where anybody who cares about what we do in the TOC can come along and talk and ask questions. We only have 45 minutes booked, so I think the agenda is going to have to be fairly limited, but I was hoping to have a very quick review of what we've achieved, maybe looking into the future a little bit, and a discussion around storage, which I think is a hot topic. If there's anything that anybody is burning to talk about, please send me and Chris an email about this, and we'll put it onto the agenda and maybe ask for more time if we need it. There will also be a regular TOC call on the Tuesday of that week, which you can attend in person if you like. Okay.
There's also, Alexis, going to be a storage face-to-face that week that Clint has sent out a doodle poll for, but it's looking like it's going to be on Tuesday.
Right.
That we'll publish as well.
Okay, let's make sure that gets properly socialized, because people who care about storage will want to hear what you have to say there. Which is a good segue into the next section, which is the working group updates. So here we go. We've got storage update on slide 12, which is Ben and Clint. Can I hand over to you to talk us through what your strategy is, what you want to do next, and why you need help from the rest of the TOC to do that?
Great. So on slide 12, this is just an agenda. We've got a couple of slides. I think we've had a bunch of great, healthy debate and discussion as of late in the storage working group. We're working on a white paper and landscape, and we're kind of just going to give an update of where we are. Clint's going to dive in with the cloud native storage definition. I'm going to also say a few words there. Then Clint's going to talk a bit about updated view of how we're seeing the storage landscape. We're going to give a little bit of an update around CSI, what's really happening within that community, and then talk a little bit about next steps. So Clint, you want to jump in?
Yep, appreciate it, Ben. So slide 13 is where we are. As Ben said, we've had some great healthy discussions within the SWG over the past few meetings. At the bottom of slide 13, there's a link that says, what is CNS discussion? This is a Google Groups discussion where we've had a lot of people weigh in on what their views are and what the cloud native storage definition should be. We feel that this is important to define because, one, it helps shape like the white papers that we write and the scope of them, but it also helps make sense of what's going on in the ecosystem. So as we review, if you want to review the discussion, like the definition here basically comes from that discussion, but there's some key things that we're laying out within these bullet points. The first one is really the expectations from an application perspective in cloud native environments. And this says that storage resources should be interoperable for applications in these environments. With that, the consumption experience should be seamless, and the operations of the storage should be transparent to the application and to the user. So that's, I think, a key goal for any of the cloud native storage resources that can be relevant to applications. And then the next two things that we list here have a bit to do with key capabilities. So first of all, we want to support the decoupling of storage services from applications, which really supports, I think, bullet number 1. And then with that basically means that resources are consumed on demand and self-provisioned. The next key point is that we want these resources to be reliable and elastic in both capacity and performance. This aligns a bit to, I think, the cloud-like NIST definition. It aligns to the expectations people have of consuming cloud-like resources. And what that should really mean is that it's seemingly unlimited resources that are measured to ensure optimal and efficient use. And then the next question, the next bullet is, how does this all happen? So interoperability should occur through standard interfaces if it's going to be cloud native storage resources. And that's essentially what makes it composable. The last bullet here basically says that the definition of cloud native storage is intended to be a bit broad, and it's intended to be able to capture what we're doing today and a little bit of what's going to happen tomorrow with storage as cloud native evolves. And I'll turn it over to Ben for slide 14.
Oh, great. Okay, getting off mute. Great. So this is where there's definitely been a little little bit less consensus around exactly both what we want the storage working group scope to be, as well as how we want to define cloud native storage. So there's been an open question about whether or not cloud native storage includes both the discussion around volumes and how the storage is actually consumed, as well as the middleware and data services that really sort of are the way in which applications and users interact with the storage. So, the perspective that I believe that we have, and that I'm definitely taking as the chair, is that it's in scope for the storage working group to be considering all these different middleware and services, frameworks, tools, other things on top. And we definitely want the storage working group to continue to be reviewing projects like that and trying to determine which ones make sense for the CNCF. But this is definitely a place where I'd love to hear from other TOC members around whether or not they also believe that this is in scope for the storage working group, and we should be continuing to look at these, as well as if they have any input on whether or not they want to define that as part of cloud native storage, or that's just systems in the realm of cloud native. And then also here, we've just got the link to the current in progress white paper, so folks can take a look there. You'll definitely see that it's in progress. There's lots of notes, but we'd love to get feedback from folks. Okay, Clint, I think, is going to talk now through blowing up the landscape, so we don't just have a single cloud native storage blob, but we have subparts of that blob that help better define what's all in the cloud native storage bubble.
Yep, thank you. So the main landscape, and I think this is one of the action items, Alexis, that you asked us for, was to make some more sense out of the cloud native storage as far as the CNCF landscape view. And right now that landscape has one bubble that says cloud native storage. And there's a lot more going on than that. And it doesn't really do, I think, the area justice to help anyone identify what's important, what are critical pieces, and what are critical projects for what reasons. So the idea here is we're going to take that bubble and have kind of a double click or a drill down into it to look at the different components and projects that fit and what role they play in enabling cloud native storage volume specifically right now. And so the slide 15 are the different components, and we walk through some of how this works as well. So in order to enable essentially workloads that sit on top of cluster orchestrators, in order to enable those workloads to talk to storage systems, which is that C, and to do data plane related operations of reading and writing bits and bytes, and et cetera. In order to enable that, there's really two paths that we're seeing right now for cloud native storage volumes. The first path is that we have defined interfaces, right? And this is what makes the interaction composable, essentially. But we have defined interfaces between storage systems and cluster orchestrators. And this is where a storage system may build a plugin that interacts with some of the existing standard interfaces that we have out there. And that may be the up-and-coming CSI interface. It may be the Docker volume driver interface, which is widely used, maybe the Flex interface, et cetera. So there's defined interfaces, and building a plugin is really what's captured in the A bubble to ensure that a workload can make use of the storage system. We also have an additional category and implementation where there's a framework or tool that's used to facilitate the creation of this interoperability. So you've got in the B section, you've got a interface, which is any one of the above interfaces. You've got a framework or a tool, and that could be a project like Rexray or something like that, Rexray or even Rook. And those projects represent kind of an abstraction from a control plane to make it easier to build plugins, and then to really facilitate connecting a workload to a storage system and facilitate the creation of the plugins. So this is a landscape that we're going to start populating with different projects as a drill down into what cloud native storage is. There's a landscape sheet in the bottom right, and that's something that you can go to see a bit of research that's been done across the ecosystem for what types of plugins are out there, what interfaces, et cetera. Okay, so Moving on to slide 16, we want to do a CSI futures update just to keep the TOC aware of, I think one of the projects that this SWG is in pretty wide consensus about being important to CNCF. And just to keep our eye on what the time frame is. There's a few key milestones that we want to highlight as part of the slide 16. The first is that the 0.1 specification is getting very, very close to being done. I think from a practical perspective, we feel like it's in the high 90s% in terms of the major items that have been outstanding. That's moving towards the initial CO implementations. So we've got 3 COs that have called out that they're actively involved in implementing. You've got Kubernetes, Mesos, and Cloud Foundry have all said that they're working on implementation, and we're expecting with the 0.1 tag that they'd all be in sync with the initial alpha-based support for the COs. We've also got a ton of work through a project called Go CSI, which is done by the code team, and also through Portworx has been doing a ton of work too. And there's a lot of the validation and tooling involved in making the spec easier to implement and doing some key things that help get the spec easy to consume. Those have all been happening in the meanwhile as well, which eventually will hopefully get merged into the actual project. So the next milestone after the implementation, like what the project maintainers have said, is that once 2 COs actually do an implementation, then they'll be interested in moving towards a 1.0 specification. So along with doing a CNCF project presentation, which I would hope sometime in the beginning of next year, depending on everybody's availability, we're also going to have a 1.0 spec to get that further, to get the spec moving forward, to get it ratified by the COs, and then to essentially get a 1.0 implementation inside of the COs and the plugins themselves. So with that, I'll pass it back to Ben for number 17.
Great, yeah. And the last thing I just wanted to say about the CSI slide is just to be respectful of the maintainers. The date around exactly when they would be discussing a proposal to the CNCF, that's just more of an estimate that that Clint's put out there. That's not an official date that they've discussed, as well as the 0.2. That there's a question mark there because that's not an actual date they've discussed. Just wanted to be clear about that. Okay. Right. So, as both Clint and I mentioned, we've had some great, healthy discussions in the storage working group. I think many people feel like a face-to-face is going to help us resolve some of the open questions and drive towards consensus. We're going to do that in Austin. There's a Doodle Poll out right now. We can share it with the broader CNCF community if more folks are interested. So that should happen then. And then, both the white paper and the landscape will be asking for sign off from the TOC. So of course we'll make that known and visible when we get to that point. And then we want to be reviewing projects. If folks have projects out there that they're interested falls within the scope of the storage working group, please let me know. Please let us know, and we'll start taking a look.
Okay, thanks, Ben. I've just added a few things to that slide 17 about the face-to-face. It would be good to understand if we could boil this down to, I think you've kind of implied it in the last 2 or 3 slides with Clint, but what are the top deliverables? What are the open questions? I understand that there's still some debate around storage versus volumes versus storage middleware, and it would be really good to have that laid out in writing. I should actually put it down and say, this is what we are not decided on, and get it foregrounded so that the TOC can either help or offer an opinion or join the discussion. Is that something that we can do? Because I'm sort of...
Of course, yep. That sounds great. We can do that, no problem.
Could you share that with people before Austin Week to say these are the main areas where we're going to try and reach decisions this week, please?
Yep.
Thank you very much. And send it around on the list. Just say this is what you need to be looking at. Okay, does anyone else want to chip in on that topic? Okay. Serverless is next. Who is going to lead this one?
I can take it.
Thanks.
So I don't know if Doug is on or not, but we reviewed this last week, and so I just want to we only had a few minutes to kind of go through the entire presentation. So what Chris thought we should do this week is sort of just go through the next steps with the TOC again and see if there's any discussion. So we have a white paper and a landscape that we have finished, and we'd like to work with the Cncf to get published before Cloud Native Con. We are very excited about sort of continuing the work group efforts around eventing, and so we had a work group meeting last week, and there was a lot of excitement around continuing the work group efforts. And then slide 19 was looking for some agreement to release the white paper as an official doc, and then to kind of explore the eventing specification as our first as our next work product from the work group. So does anyone on the TOC have concerns with us continuing? First, I guess, is there agreement on publishing the white paper? Has everybody had a chance to take a look at it yet?
I have not had a chance to read it since a couple of months ago, personally, when it wasn't in an incomplete state. I think if we want to publish it and say this is a white paper, then it would be good for some people to formally review it. Perhaps we could ask the TOC contributors to volunteer to do that. Would anyone like to volunteer to actually act as a formal reviewer to sign off on the white paper? I see Nick Chase in the chat window there. Thanks, Nick. Anyone else?
Thanks, Nick.
One more person? Well, if we can't find somebody in the group, maybe we could reach out to somebody who is an active serverless participant in one of the open source projects. Quinton is there. Yeah, so Quinton and Nick. So Ken, if you could work with them and let us know
Alexis,
what's done.
can
Yes,
you hear
hello.
me?
Of course.
Sorry, I've been trying to talk, but I think I was double muted. I was volunteering to help out.
Okay, I will write your name in the chat window for you.
All right, thank you.
All right, thanks. So Ken, you know what to do next.
Yep.
Thank you.
Got it.
All right, and let us know when that review is completed. And this is something that, serverless is a hot topic in the industry, and there is a real downside risk of the CNCF publishing something which people say is, too complicated or sort of missing the point or something else that is just bad. So I would really like it if we have something which is succinct and useful to the community. That's what I think we should be looking for in the review process.
Sounds good.
Okay.
And then the next piece is we're going to start working on a venting specification.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to kind of make sure that there were no concerns from the TOC members with us starting that work effort next.
I would only highlight that in the Open Metrics presentation, Richard pointed out that Open Metrics has been asked they've internally decided in their own group that they should expand from thinking about metrics to also thinking about events and logs, which I personally think is unwise. The rationale offered was that at Google, among others, there is a desire to have kind of one framework for thinking about these things in order to correlate them more efficiently. A related blog post about this topic was posted this week by Jana, who works on the Open Census team, called something like How We Do Observability at Google, that you might have seen. So this is something where we need to tread carefully and not have two groups of people doing absolutely identical things without any users. It's much more important to have open source projects that actually have users and build from there, I think. So let's just be careful about that. So I'm okay, but
we brought them into the discussion, but I can make sure I bring in the right people there for this discussion as we move on. It's a great point. Doug, is there anything you wanted to add that you think is important for the TOC to know or discuss?
Nope, I think we covered it all. Thanks, guys.
thank you.
And I'm on next also with the networking update. And so I kind of put in this slide from the CNCF overall landscape that shows a cloud native network piece. And that, so far we brought in CNI as our first networking project, but there are a lot of other projects out there that we are getting presentations from and looking at and talking to. The work group has sort of been stale for probably the last couple of months because of just me changing jobs and having no time to do anything else but become MasterCardized. And so that's kind of taken away a little bit of my focus from this area, but I'm jumping back into it. And we had a couple of meetings that were really good discussions. And if you go to slide 21, you can kind of see what we're working on now is reviewing some of the projects that have been presenting to us over the last several months to consider for bringing proposal forward to the CNCF to become projects within the CNCF. And then a much bigger discussion has started around network modeling and network services, where we want to define a landscape for what makes a cloud native network, look at some cloud native design patterns and what that means at the networking and service discovery layers, and then review projects, kind of going back to your point, Alexis, you made, look at some of the projects that are out there that are trying to solve specific networking and network services issues, trying to see which ones of those align with the patterns that we have defined, and reach out to those projects and see if they align to some of the CNCF charter that we have defined. And there'll be much more information coming in the December 5th meeting because there's an effort underway to look at a network project to bring forward. So
Yeah, I mean, taking off my chairperson's hat just for a second, Weaveworks and Docker have announced at DockerCon a joining forces around LibNetwork and WeaveNet, and we would be proposing that as a effort on the first meeting of December for review and initial comment. If you would like to see a preview of the slides for that, they are public and I'm happy to share them. So drop me a note or just ask on the list so I can post the link.
yeah, man, definitely has my complete support.
Thank you, Ken.
Not that matters, but I say it anyway.
It does matter. One question about the network modeling and services is, are you planning to include layer 7 and layer 4 stuff here?
I am.
Good. Okay.
At least from the discussion standpoint, I'm not sure how much of the layer 7 aspect will move. We will consider, but that's something I think we should be considering.
Yeah, I think please talk to Matt Klein about this because he has some interesting and quite strong views, needless to say, about the opportunity for a sort of routing or routing stack. And I think it'd be good to have Envoy in the room for that conversation.
Absolutely. Yep. Very, very important one.
All right. Anyone else?
And this work group, like the other work groups, has we have like a YouTube that we record our meetings on, and you can join the meetings. They're all listed on the GitHub site. So feel free to jump in if you're interested in learning more.
Cool. Okay, so we do have time for the IPA presentation after all, which is great. Who wants to lead that, please?
Hi there, this is Warren Sandel. I work on the Open Policy Agent project. I will also mention that I have Tim Hinrich from Stira and Tristan Swedell from Google here as well. And so they can help answer questions towards the end. So going to slide 24, what we want to talk about today is the Open Policy Agent. So we want to give everybody an overview of the project, talk a little bit about how we've gotten to where we are today, what's happening inside the community, and then kind of talk about where we hope to head with the project in the future. So going to slide 25, I just want to give a little bit of a background on how we look at policy to make sure everybody's on the same page. And so when I'm talking about policy, what I'm talking about are rules or the rules that sort of govern how systems are expected to behave. And the interesting thing about these rules or these policies is that they're vital to every single organization because they codify important requirements around things like cost and performance and security and so on. But the challenge is that these policies are often very difficult to enforce because organizations have to apply them across the stack in different environments, on different platforms, in different languages, and they're often very organization specific, and they're hard to predict because they sort of evolve organically inside of organizations, and they tend to change a lot over time. And so when it comes to actually enforcing these policies, a lot of the time people fall back to things like tribal knowledge, and they kind of just hope that the system and the people are doing the right things. So they don't get very strong guarantees when they're trying to enforce policy. On the other hand, if they try to sort of hard code the policy decisions, they end up with, so they end up with policy decisions that are sort of difficult to understand and expensive to change because they end up so tightly coupled with the rest of the application business logic. Now, none of this is really necessarily new. There are existing policy solutions in the space, but what you find when you dig into them is that a lot of the time they lack sort of like fundamental expressiveness around the things you can say. So for example, they don't support the kind of logic you want. They don't give you access to context and data that you need to make decisions, or they don't let you actually produce the kinds of decisions you need to produce, or moreover, you can't compose policies and so on. So going to slide 26, the Open Policy Agent is an open source general purpose policy engine. And the goal of the project is to solve a lot of these problems. So what we mean by general purpose is that you can take OPA and you can apply it at any layer of the stack in any system. And so whether you're talking about policy enforcement in microservices or cluster orchestrators or CI/CD pipelines, OPA provides like a reusable building block that you can use to enforce policy. Now, at the core of OPA is a high-level declarative policy language called Rego. And what that language gives you is a high-level way to define rules to questions or that answer questions like, can a service perform some operation on some resource, or what clusters should a workload be placed on, or what labels have to be set on an object when it's created, and so on. And so one of the powerful features of the language is it lets you define policy decisions that are non-Boolean. And so in Rego, it's no problem to express a set of clusters that a workload should be placed on, or a collection of key value pairs that need to be applied to an object when it's created. Now, when you integrate with OPA, you have sort of two options. You can either use it as a library or a daemon, but in either case, it works the same way. So what you do is you give OPA a set of policies and a set of data, and then you offload your policy decisions to it. And so the way this works is that as a service, when you need to make a policy decision, what you do is you execute a query against OPA, and OPA takes the policy and data in the query, and it computes an answer, a policy decision, and then it sends that decision back to your service. And in doing so, you've basically decoupled the policy decision from your service. Now, in addition to the core sort of evaluation engine that you get with OPA, we also give you a bunch of tooling to help you develop and test and debug your policies. OPA itself is actually written in Go, and it's designed to be extremely lightweight. So like I said, you can take it and you can embed it in other Go applications, but you can also run it as a sidecar or a host-level agent. And it stores all of the policies and data that it knows about in memory, and it has zero sort of runtime or deployment time dependencies by itself. Okay, so moving to slide 27. So we took this project and we released it in July 2016. That was the initial release. And the goal at the time was basically to create a sort of general purpose policy engine that allowed you to make policy decisions over arbitrary JSON data. And the reason for that, which is still true today, is that a lot of the time when you're making these policy decisions in modern systems, you're trying to reason about information or reason over information that's represented as complex, deeply nested, document-oriented data. And so that's sort of what we executed on at the time, and we created this new project, OPA, in the open. We created the new language, and then the necessary runtime to take it and integrate it with existing systems in the space. And so then following that, we sort of moved into a phase where we focused more on applying OPA to different problems in the space. And so the goal there was really to solve real problems that people have in the field. And in the process, we built up a little community around OPA, and we also learned a bunch of requirements for OPA and sort of hill climbed on the implementation. And so we took it and we applied it to different domains and different projects and saw a lot of success. Now, at this point, we're still sort of looking for new use cases and new domains to apply OPA in, but we're also really focused on hardening the implementation and sort of applying it or building out a more advanced feature set. So in terms of community, moving on to slide 28, like I said, we started OPA in early 2016. And then the goal has always sort of been to have this sort of reusable building block that would complement other projects in the ecosystem. And so then earlier this year, we got in touch with Google and Tristan, other folks at Google, including Tristan. And what we realized was a lot of us were working on similar use cases, and we were actually using a similar approach. And what we all recognized was that it would be valuable if there was a single open, vendor-neutral solution within the industry that people could use, and that we'd all be better off if that was the case. And so since about May of this year, Google has been actively working with us on the project. And at this point, we have people across both companies that are actively contributing. Now, in terms of adoption, we've seen a lot of growth this year, which is really exciting. So for example, Netflix has started using OPA in the core of their authorization system. And so what OPA provides to Netflix is this high performance engine that they can offload authorization decisions to. So regardless of whether they're dealing with different protocols or resource types or execution environments, OPA is there to answer policy questions that they have at runtime. And so in Netflix's own words, OPA helps them solve like a fundamental security problem and also get there faster, which is really cool. And so today at Netflix, OPA is being used across multiple teams, and it's solving authorization in HTTP APIs, gRPC APIs, Kafka, and we're really excited so we're really happy to be helping with that, and we're looking forward to new use cases going forward. Medallia is another company that's using OPA. And so Medallia, what they use OPA for is to make authorization decisions over changes that Terraform wants to make in order to reduce risk. And so, for example, different people in the company might have different risk budgets associated with the changes they can make. And so that helps them make sure that their infrastructure is stable and reliable. In addition to performing authorization over Terraform, Medallia is also using OPA to audit their AWS account, the resources in their AWS accounts. And they've actually released a library of policies that other companies can take and use with OPA to audit their AWS security. So that's also neat. Now, we've also been working a lot with the Kubernetes community, and we've been actively engaging there. And so companies like Schubert Phyllis are using OPA to enforce fine-grained security and resource management policies through the authorization and admission control extensions that Kubernetes supports. Huawei is another example of a company that's actively evaluating OPA, at least, and they're really interested in using OPA for different workload placement and storage selection use cases. And so the thing I want to point out here is that these are several companies that are publicly using OPA, but we're also in conversation and discussion with a number of large enterprises across different sectors that are really eager to use OPA and are very interested in adopting it. Now, moving to slide 29, in addition to these companies that we have using OPA, we've also seen the community and the open source community build a number of integrations for the project. So for example, in Kubernetes 1.7, Federation added support for policy-based resource placement, and that feature leverages OPA as an external policy engine to make decisions about where to place different federated resources. We've also shown how you can take OPA and use it out of the box as an external admission controller, again, to apply sort of fine-grained resource management and security policies. More recently, we've been working with the Istio group because they're planning to build their native role-based access control solution on top of OPA. That's in addition to an OPA adapter that they're building to expose sort of the full capabilities of the OPA policy language to the Istio administrators. And so moving beyond just Kubernetes and Istio, we've also built integrations for Docker. For example, we have an authorization plugin that's available that people are interested in. We've built PAM modules to enforce policy-based control over who can SSH into a server or run sudo commands, and many others. And so it's great to see the community building these integrations. And what I think it highlights is that not only does OPA complement other projects in the ecosystem, but it also highlights how OPA can be applied across the stack to solve different kinds of policy enforcement problems. So moving ahead to slide 30, I just want to give a little overview of the roadmap that we're looking at right now. And so what we have planned right now are a bunch of language improvements being done in conjunction with Google. So the focus there is to bring on the Google CEL, or Common Expression Language, as well as provide support for things like triggers in the form of advice, promises, and obligations. We're looking, as I mentioned, to build out a standard library of policies for different platforms like AWS and Kubernetes. We're continuing to focus on performance and scalability with different optimizations and so on. And we're also trying to extend the tool set to provide better support when people write and test and debug their policies. Okay, so given the roadmap, so this sort of brings us into the future. And so on slide 31, I want to talk a little bit about why we think OPA should be part of the CNCF. And I think that the answer to that question is actually fairly simple. And so as microservices become this industry standard, the ecosystem has provided solutions for a number of areas like orchestration and deployment and routing and authentication and so on. But what it hasn't provided a solution for so far is something that lets you author and enforce who can do what across your services. And the reason this is important is that the legacy ways or the old ways of doing access control in the enterprise, like perimeter-based, centralized network security, don't work in these modern microservice-based environments. And so the key thing here is that application developers and enterprises should not have to roll their own solution to these problems. So what I think we're going to see is a lot of companies and a lot of teams building projects like Netflix did, where they take their authorization decisions and they offload them to a dedicated engine like OPA. Now, in the longer term, I think that every organization is still going to face these different policy enforcement problems across the stack. And so whether you're talking about CI/CD or microservices or container orchestrators or provisioning tools, there are always going to be these new policies that pop up that you're going to have to enforce all the time. And so moving to slide 32, what I think we want to have available for people is a building block that allows them to enforce policy in the same way up and down the stack. And so that's the reason why we created OPA in the very beginning, is that we want to have a project that complements other things in the ecosystem and allows them to provide fine-grained access control to their users out of the box. Because at the end of the day, enterprises need to have the ability to control who can do what across their systems. And so I think it's fair to argue that OPA and policy in general will help accelerate cloud adoption among cloud-native projects in the enterprise, because when enterprises ask for policy-based control, those projects are going to have an answer. So finally, if we move to slide 33, I just want to talk a little bit about how I think CNCF can benefit OPA. And so at a high level, the most important thing that the CNCF can provide is a vendor-neutral, respected home for the project. And the reason why we need that is because we want to create a rallying point around policy as code. And so that's what the CNCF can really provide, at least initially. Now, in the near term, obviously the CNCF's recognition within the industry will also help with visibility, which will drive more adopters and contributors to the project, which we're looking forward to. It'll also help foster communication between OPA and other projects in the ecosystem. And then I think that longer term, and quite importantly, we want to be able to leverage the CNCF's expertise when it comes to things like developing governance processes and community standards, because those things are obviously incredibly important. And so that sort of concludes the presentation. And so I just want to move on to slide 34 and say thank you for letting us present the project to the TOC. We think that OPA is a fantastic fit for the CNCF, and we're really excited to continue working with other cloud-native projects. And so we'd be happy to submit a proposal for the project. We've been working with Ken Owens, who's offered to sponsor a proposal. And so, yeah, thank you very much. If anybody has questions, we're happy to answer them and chat about them.
Just a stunned silence. That was very fast. Thank you for doing it so quickly. I'm just trying to digest. I have a few questions. Like, one is, you mentioned that you want to have uniform policies up and down the stack or some kind of homogeneity. It would be really helpful to see an example of that presented in a style that a developer would understand and feel like they could use. Because otherwise it's very, very abstract.
So to be clear, Alexis, this is Brian Grant, by the way. What I see is a lot of demand for this, not from developers so much, but from operators who really have a lot of complex policy requirements. We see people building ad hoc tools for this in the Kubernetes ecosystem, like KubeLint or KGuard, where they want to impose all kinds of consistency requirements or security requirements or other kind of policy requirements, like even things to make sure that applications are monitored and logged in a consistent way, or things that are not strictly security necessarily. So I definitely see, you know, a lot of examples were in the presentation, but authorization, admission control, CI/CD policy, placement policy across multiple clusters. There are all kinds of things where we see the need for something that's more general than what can easily be expressed by a simple API like RBAC, for example. So I think OPA is really promising. I'm happy to see them presenting here. I mean, obviously they talked about integration with Kubernetes and Istio and collaboration with other parts of Google. But you know, they've been engaging in the Kubernetes community in a number of SIGs, and there seems to be a lot of interest.
I'd still love to see an example because it's very abstract with that one. Operators or developers?
Sure. Yeah. So, on that integration slide, you know, all of those integrations that we listed are ones that have been built, and all of those integrations have, you know, demos or POCs or even just tutorials that show how you can get up and running. So I don't have any examples in this slide deck right now, but I'd be happy to point you at examples on the website or anywhere that you could get a sense of.
I think that would be very helpful to maybe send that out on the chat.
Sure. Absolutely.
Or actually on the list, because I think we're going to run out of time on the chat in a sec.
Okay, yeah, I'll send, I'll find out the mailing list info and do that.
And I think in the proposal, Alexis will make sure to have a few examples in there.
Hey, Alexis, another area of use cases that we're exploring at Docker is using OPA for content pipeline policies. So, you know, using Notary, for example, based on the signature and the attached signature material of an image at some point in the pipeline for storage in a registry or for deployment, what should be done with it? Should we accept deploying this image? Things like that. There's a lot of interesting applications there for something like this.
Cool. Thank
Sure.
you.
One other.
Any other questions? Yeah, go.
Oh, so this is Tristan, and I can tell you a little bit about why I got involved. And it's I'm from Google. I work on Firebase, and it's a purely serverless, opsless world inside Firebase. And so when you remove the traditional app server, the cloud API or whatever it is that you happen to be connecting to becomes your entire stack. And so if you can think of Firebase as a funnel, an entry point, you have an API which is capable of enforcing policy. You grow that to an app server which is capable of enforcing the same policy without any loss of parity. And then you can grow into further things, either that be that App Engine or Kubernetes or some other cloud provider. And so that's something that's really attractive for having consistent policy across stacks, is that if I can take my logic and move my implementation elsewhere but still be enforcing the same policy, that's super important to me to provide kind of an open ecosystem and to prevent years of vendor lock-in. That's roughly why I got involved, but I imagine others share similar concerns.
It would be good for that to be reflected in a more formal proposal, for sure, because I think these things definitely bring it to life. And for me as somebody who's not familiar with OPA, really, apart from having looked at it briefly a few months ago, it seems quite abstract, and it would be good to make it more concrete. I'm just looking at Brian's Federation example right now, for example. Anyone else got questions? Any questions, anybody?
I had one brief comment, which is something that didn't come out as clearly in the proposal or in the slide deck, is the fact that these policies are understandable and creatable by people who are not necessarily software engineers, which is often the case in enterprises. And I think that's a pretty key value proposition here, which is that the language and the tools are on top of the language enable non-software engineers to compose and understand policies, which is pretty key to all of this.
Yes, that is certainly a good thing to talk about.
The Istio RBAC integration is a good example of sort of a non-developer focused implementation or use of OpenBay.
Okay. All right. Do we have any other business for today apart from the working groups and the project presentation? I don't think so. Upcoming events, slide 38. I think we know about these. Sponsorship is open for next year's events. Upcoming meetings, don't forget there is a actual TOC meeting during the week of KubeCon. And we're hoping that some of that will be an in-person meeting. Alrighty. Thank you very much. And thanks for the presentations today, everybody.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks.